Hey, what's going on, you guys? It's Jai again. Some of you know me as Jai Binks in Discord or Kronos in game. I just wanted to start things off by saying thank you so much for all the support and stuff I got on my Firebrand video. I really appreciate that. I was pleasantly surprised to see the amount of positive feedback I got for it, as well as kind of people giving me other kind of insightful feedback about it, what I could do differently for other videos. I wasn't expecting it to be received so well, and I figured I had a bunch of free time come into my lap here, so I figured I would do a few more of those videos. So I'll pump videos out. Probably my goal is to get one out every week or other week, but what I will do is I will kind of do an overview of a lot of the meta classes, specifically the ones I feel comfortable playing. So other than Firebrand, which I'm going to do a follow-up intermediate Firebrand video for, where I might actually have some footage in there as well, of some actual fights, just so that way you can kind of get an idea of some more advanced tactics and sort of things to watch out for when you're playing Firebrand, as well as to go over some additional tips. But I will also be covering support and power Spellbreaker today. I will do Power Berserker at some point. I'll do Power Scourge and Reaper on another day as well. I'll also do Power Core Guard and DH, and I will also do a support Chrono video. And then once I feel comfortable enough practicing it, I might also do a support Scrapper video at some point as well. But those are the ones I'm going to be starting off with. So we'll just get right into the video here. So I'm going to start off with Spellbreaker here. So for Spellbreaker, for anybody that hasn't seen the class before, I'll kind of give a quick overview of what your jobs are on Spellbreaker. So generally speaking, for Spellbreaker, for both the support and the power variation, one of your primary jobs is to rip boons and to prevent people from getting back boons. So that's something that Spellbreaker does pretty well in kind of burst scenarios, and you'll see that you have a number of tools for that, but kind of the big thing to bear in mind for Spellbreaker that both the power and the support variation share is that you're always going to be running this Elite skill called Winds of Disenchantment. So as I kind of talked about in my Firebrand video, stability is really important in World versus World because it helps you to negate CCs such as pulls, knockbacks, dazes, all of those sorts of things that will inevitably lead to your death in Zerg fights. Those are all things that you can actively remove on Spellbreaker. And Winds of Disenchantment as a skill, what it does is it drops this big dome whenever you use it, and you might have a commander that calls for it. They might call for Winds or Bubble or something like that, or they might not. But what you do is when the skill goes down, it removes boons in a radius, and it also applies a condition called Disenchantment, which prevents people inside of that bubble, a certain amount of targets, from actually getting back boons. So not only are you potentially removing stability, but you're also you're then preventing people from getting back that stability. So really potent tool for fights and for potentially killing targets. So that's just something I wanted to kind of let you know off the bat. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with the support variant of Spellbreaker here, and for the support variant, kind of something to bear in mind is what your jobs are. So generally speaking, other than removing boons, your other jobs on this spec include condition cleanses, which you can do in bursts pretty well, especially if you run specific rune sets and things of that nature, as well as CC. So you're also very much responsible for crowd control. So that's locking down enemies, preventing them from using skills, hampering their movement, and you're doing all of this to try and facilitate downs, try and get them locked in a spot so your DPS can light them up, and you guys can come away from that fight in one piece. So those are kind of the big things to bear in mind. Cleansing, CC, and boon removal on support Spellbreaker. For your actual gear set that you're going to be running full minstrel gear, which is toughness, vitality, healing, power, and concentration, for those that didn't see my Firebrand video. And other than that, you have two kind of rune sets that you want to kind of I would say are probably the most common, depending on how your commander runs their support Spellbreakers. So for the superior runes of durability, I think this is generally accepted as the kind of the universally best option for Spellbreaker. There might be other ones that exist out there, but this is probably the big one that you'll see. And the reason for this is because it gives extra toughness, boon duration. It pumps out a couple extra boons for your subgroup, which are actually they're really handy for them to have as kind of cover buffs, as well as just it's nice to have. And you're also getting extra HP out of this, which will help facilitate some of your other jobs. However, some commanders will run the Trooper variant, and the Trooper variant makes it that each of your shouts removes conditions. So people that are running that trait line might be playing with a lot more shouts than you'll see on the build I'll show you today. And for that, they're doing that so that way they can cleanse tons of conditions, because that build, while it can't over a long fight cleanse as much as, say, a Scrapper or something like that, in a very burst scenario, they can cleanse a lot of conditions. So definitely an option to explore if your commander runs Trooper runes and kind of play test for yourself. Maybe run Arc, see what the numbers look like for you. Definitely something to try out. As for the two weapon sets you're going to be running a hammer, and then you're going to be running sword and warhorn. And essentially, to kind of briefly summarize what these do, hammer is your bigger CC tool. You're going to be using this a lot on your melee bombs. This is going to remove a lot of boons for you whenever you interrupt enemies and things of that nature, because you're going to be running the nullification sigil as well as the absorption sigil. And then on your other weapon set, you're going to be running sword and warhorn. So for that line, you're going to be running the transference and energy sigil largely. And these are because this weapon set is for movement, it's for personal sustain, and also it is your bigger, like, out of combat healing weapon set. You're going to be using this a lot between downtime, between melee engages. As for the actual trait line you're going to be running on Support Spellbreaker, you're always going to be running Spellbreaker and Tactics, but for your third trait line, you have an option of either Defense or Discipline. So I'll go over those when I get to that trait line, but I'm going to start off with the two that are consistent across the board. So for the Spellbreaker trait line, you're going to be running No Escape, Loss Aversion, and Enchantment Collapse generally. I'll kind of explain what those all do and how they kind of fit into the grand scheme of Spellbreaker. So for Spellbreaker, essentially you're like a normal warrior. You're going to have your burst skill, but also because you're running Spellbreaker, you're going to have an additional burst skill called Full Counter. And for anybody that hasn't played warriors before, burst skills are generally a big part of your rotation, whether you're playing as a Berserker or Spellbreaker, power or support, doesn't matter. You're going to be using burst skills a lot. And for this Spellbreaker line, this Full Counter tool is also procs all of anything that procs off of a burst skill will also proc off of Full Counter. And what Full Counter does is it's a fully mobile, so you'll stay moving the entire time you use it, skill that essentially what it is it's a counter attack. It'll block the first attack that hits you, then it will give you an evade frame after that, and it will also have a AoE daze, which will help with removing boons for you, and also because of how Spellbreaker works, whenever you use your Full Counter skill, you refresh all your other burst skills. So generally speaking, for both support and power Spellbreaker, your general workflow is going to look like you're going to be doing a burst into a Full Counter into a burst, and then whatever other weapons, skills, and stuff you have. So that's just something to bear in mind. Very handy for you. Other things to bear in mind in the Spellbreaker line, you're running No Escape, and what this does is this is a tool that makes it that your dazes and your stuns, which you have quite a few on this build, will give a second of Immobilize as well. And this is important because what it does is if an enemy has a stun break that they use immediately after being CC'd, if they are not able to cleanse that Immobilize as well, they're still going to be stuck on that spot. So it's just an extra layer of the enemies need to have stability and resistance if they want to reliably be able to get out of your CC, which is great. Other than that, you're also removing boons whenever you do knockdowns and things like that. This is further amplified by your actual weapon set because of absorption sigils and nullification sigil and hammer. Whenever you're CCing, you're removing extra boons with this as well. So these two things combined will really help with your boon removal. Additionally, you have these two trait lines. A loss aversion, what it does is it gives you adrenaline, essentially. It does damage as well, but the damage is pretty negligible. But the big part for you is that you're actually getting adrenaline whenever you remove boons, which is very, very handy for you because that is your main source of adrenaline gain on Spellbreaker, on support Spellbreaker specifically. And this is further amplified by enchantment collapse that makes it whenever you remove a boon on an enemy, there's actually a cascading effect where all surrounding enemies, up to 5 surrounding enemies, will also get a boon removed on them. So this is kind of this like chaining positive feedback loop thing going on here. There's really great trait synergy between these. And with these, pretty much all of your boon removal tools are going to fill up your adrenaline bar very quickly. In the tactics line, you're running Roaring Reveille to buff your Warhorn skills. So you'll see that on Warhorn you have Fury and you have Resistance. I'll kind of talk about what those do for you when I get into the weapon skills. You also are getting a little bit of extra personal sustain through Shrug It Off, which pops off it procs your Shake It Off skill, a kind of a minor version of it that will cleanse a condition, will break stun, and will heal you a little bit. Just handy to have. And that's also kind of adding on to that is also whenever you remove damaging conditions from allies, you're also healing them because you're running this trait line, which is also handy for you. Even more so if you're running that Shoutbreaker variation. And then you also have Vigorous Shouts. And what Vigorous Shouts does is it reduces the recharge on your shout skills, gives you extra healing power, and it also makes your shout skills do a burst heal as well. So if you're running that Shoutbreaker line again, you're going to do really big burst heals, but even without it, you're going to do a pretty chunky amount of heals. So definitely a great trait line to run. In your last trait line, you have an option of either running Defense or Discipline. So essentially, for both of these playstyles are a little bit different. They're not majorly different. I'd really recommend trying these both out for yourself. Generally, commanders don't have a massive preference for one or the other. It's kind of more of a personal preference. You're still giving out the same amount of support either way. It really comes down to a little bit of extra movement and control in the discipline line versus the more bruisery front line playstyle of defense. So for the defense line, you're getting reduced incoming damage when you're above a certain threshold. You're getting regen whenever you have movement impairing conditions on you, which can be very handy, as well as reducing the duration of those. You're healing whenever you're spending your adrenaline bar, and since you're bursting a lot, you're going to get a lot of healing out of this. You're going to get a single get out of jail free card every 5 seconds, or sorry, not every 5 minutes. Because you're going to be proccing your lesser endure pain, which makes it so that you're taking no damage from attacks, you're getting a stun break, and it's just really handy to have because you get yoinked once, the skill will automatically get you out of that and allow you to get back to tech, no problem. You're also getting reduced strike damage when you have resolution and giving yourself resolution pretty much for like 50% uptime if you're getting any crits off in melee engages and things like that. And then you're also running Cleansing Ire to remove conditions whenever you're bursting. So since you're doing that 3 burst combo pretty frequently, this will remove a couple conditions from you. If you run the Discipline line instead, as I said, it's kind of more control-based. What this really does for you is it reduces the recharging your burst skills a little bit, allows you to weapon swap more frequently, and you also get adrenaline on weapon swap. So this can be really good for kind of going back and forth between hammer and then sword and warhorn. However, what I would say is that sword and warhorn, those warhorn skills, have a pretty long cooldown. That's why I generally run the defense line, because I find that I can, even without discipline, I'm able to get this skill off, like get off my 2 warhorn skills, go into hammer, do all my hammer stuff, and by the time I get back into sword, these might still be on cooldown, so I don't worry about this too much. If you do run Discipline, though, you're going to be running Warrior Sprint for the extra movement, as well as you're able to remove immobiles. You're able to remove Immobilize whenever you use one of your movement skills. So on Support Spellbreaker, that's going to be your Sword 2. So if you're locked within a mob and you have a ton of other conditions on you and you just can't cleanse through all of it, you can just use this to get out. And then on Hammer, you're able to, through your burst skill, Earthshaker. It makes you leap, and that also removes an immobile with this trait line. You would then also with this run Brawler's Recovery on support for condition removal on weapon swaps to kind of make up for not having that cleansing ire. And then you would be running Burst Mastery, really to get extra adrenaline back on your burst skills. This just allows you to burst more frequently. So, I'm just going to go over the weapon skills now. Let me just set this all back up. So for weapon skills on Support Spellbreaker, as I kind of mentioned before, Hammer is your big melee engage tool for boon rips and things of that nature, and then Sword and Warhorn is your more kind of downtime. You pretty much want to be using this whenever you're not in a melee engage, and this is kind of your buffing tool again, movement to get back to tag, all that kind of stuff. So what I will generally do, and the reason why you're running Sword here is because pretty much you don't really care about your auto attacks, you don't care about your Sword 3, you're really just doing it for the Savage Leap skill, the Sword 2. It's a very low cooldown movement skill, and you can use it to either leap to the front of your Zerg to get off that bubble as a repositioning tool, or you can use it to leap back to your tag if you've kind of been pulled off. If you're going to be doing this, I would pretty much always recommend when running Warrior to get rid of promote skill targeting. Take that off, because otherwise you're going to auto lock on enemies when you want to use something like your Sword 2, and you're going to leap to them instead of leaping in the direction you're facing. For your Warhorn 4 charge, I pretty much use this like stand your ground on a Guardian. It's kind of like a before a melee engage tool. What this is going to do is it's going to buff you with a 10% damage buff, you and all your guys in your subgroup, as well as giving them Fury, which is great for that initial engage. It's also a blasting tool, so you can use it on like a gyro or something like that as well. And it also, other than giving swiftness, it also removes movement impairing conditions. So this is a get out of jail free card for your teammates. If they get a Mo bombed or something, like if they're stuck in the back, you can pop off this skill, even if they have tons of other conditions on them, and you're guaranteed to get that immobilize off them so they can get back to their Zerg. The other skill that kind of works in a similar manner is Call of Valor. So what this one does is it gives you, vigor, so you're able to dodge roll more frequently, as well as it gives you resistance because of how we're traded, which means that you ignore all non-damaging conditions. So that's things like chill, immobilize, cripple, blind, fear, all those sorts of things. Those things you're able to ignore as long as you have Call of Valor. So this is really great for movement about the battlefield, and you also are getting barrier from this as well, which is just another great tool, and you're removing conditions. Like, this is a really strong skill. The barrier alone is great for you for pre-sacking for a push or for kind of recovering. The condition removal is great, resistance is great, vigor is great. These are all really great things that you get out of running Warhorn. So I pretty much use these skills off of cooldown. It's good to be aware of their individual applications. If your ally just has an immob on them, you can use this. Or if you're buffing for a melee engage, and if you're pulling off of something, or you see one of you guys has just gone absolutely Condi bombed in your subgroup, you can use this to help you out. On Hammer, you're using this weapon set to pretty much do as much CC as possible. So for both the sword set and the hammer set, you want to be using your burst skills almost all the time in melee engages. Flurry is a AoE a mope skill, so I'll just kind of get a little adrenaline here so I can use it. So if you position it properly, you can emote up to 3 enemies. This time I wasn't close enough. I probably had to be another step forward to immobilize all of these guys. But it's great because a lot of people aren't ready for emote bombs in comparison to like regular stab like stuns. So you can use this to give them 2 seconds of immobilize. This can let your whole group just leap on those enemies that are immobed. They won't be ready for it. It's much harder to get access to resistance resistance than it is to get to, access to stability. So very handy for that. And again, with both this one and the hammer, you're wanting to use F1, then you want to go F2, and then you want to go back into F1 to do as much CC as possible and get as many bursts off as possible. In your hammer in your hammer weapon set, on support Spellbreaker, 1 and 2 are pretty much useless to you. 3 is okay as an AoE cripple, but hammer 4, hammer 5, and your burst are your big tools. Burst is the big one. So Earthshaker, which is your F1 skill, is an AoE daze, or AoE stun rather. So it'll proc 1 second of immobilize as well. And you essentially what you want to do is you want to hit this, full counter, and then once this is procced, you'll hit your Earthshaker again, and then at that point you might use your other CCs, like Hammer 5 to lock down a target. Hammer 4 is a knockback ability, so what I would recommend is when you're using it, to make sure you're not pushing people out of your allies' bomb. So your 2 ways to do that is you can knock them into a piece of environment you know they can't push past, like knock them into a wall or something, it'll just stick them there, and they'll be CC'd. Or you want to, for example, I might Earthshaker right past the enemies if I know my Zerg's all behind me, and then knock these guys into my Zerg using Hammer 4. So both of those tools are very handy for you. As for the utility skills you're going to be running on support Spellbreaker, the kind of the meta way here is what I have on my bar. However, there is one variant I'll mention as well. Generally speaking, for support Spellbreaker, you want to be running these 4 skills: Break Enchantments, Balance Stance, Shake It Off, and Winds of Disenchantment no matter what. But for the heal, you have 2 options. You can either run the the Shout heal to the limit. This will give quite a chunky heal to you, small heal to your allies, give you adrenaline for more bursts, give them 100 endurance so they can dodge twice again, do 2 more dodge rolls, which is great. And it's on a pretty low cooldown. And this thing's healing me for like 11k, so it's a very strong heal. However, you can also run Defiant Stance. You'll see that I run this on the Power Spellbreaker variant. It's a really great, just get out of jail free card. You'll heal yourself for a small amount, but then any incoming damage you take will also heal you, which if you're in like a Zerg scenario is pretty much a guaranteed full heal. So this is a great skill for that. As for your other 4 skill lines, I run Break Enchantments. This is a AoE boon removing tool. It's unblockable. Don't really care about the damage on support, but removes 2 boons from 5 allies, which is then going to proc that enchantment collapse. So a lot of boons get removed using this. And you pretty much want to be using this off of cooldown because it has a 15-second cooldown only. And then whenever a bubble comes up, you want to be nuking this as well, because then those people that are losing their boons super quickly aren't going to be able to get them back either. Other than that, Balance Stance, you always want to run on Spellbreaker, unless you're very, very confident in your stab. I run with a lot of comp groups, and I'm not always confident in my stab. I generally will keep this on my bar. It is a stun break, but I wouldn't recommend using it for that. The skill is pretty much essentially for, almost exclusively for use with bubble. So what you want to do is you want to precast this before you cast something like a bubble, because your Winds of Disenchantment is a channel skill. So what happens is it has a 1.5 seconds cooldown, and if you hit any other skills with a fat finger during that time, or if you get CC'd at all, the whole thing cancels. So you can see I can cast it and I can cancel it just by hitting off another skill. So you really want to make sure that you're pre-casting Balance Stance before you do this, just to guarantee you get that off, no problem. Shake It Off, you're running because of that shout reduction. It's essentially what it is it's 2 stun breaks for you, so it's your personal stun break, but it also cleanses conditions on allies, which is going to heal them and yourself. You're healing all of them, and it's also an ammo skill, which is really, really great. It means you can use this skill on like melee engages and stuff and get it off multiple times during a single fight, which is very handy since you don't have the stability access that, say, a Guardian has. So for the actual rotations, I kind of mentioned it before. Again, this class is very kind of instinctual and situational, but generally what you want to be doing is you want to be buffing out of combat whenever you can. You want to be You want to be making sure that when you go into an engage, if your commander calls for a winds or a bubble, making sure that you're getting that off if you're the first bubble or if that's how your commander rolls. So commanders generally have different preferences for Spellbreaker. Some like to have a bubble order, like all their Spellbreakers have, hey, I'm bubble 1, I'm bubble 2, and then they'll call for either individual numbers or they'll say first wins, next wins, yada, yada, yada. That's one way to do it. Some commanders won't call wins at all and will just expect you to put them down. And then some might just call for wins and then all of the Spellbreakers go in and just try and chain their bubbles. All of those work. There's no big kind of one that is absolutely the way you want to do it. But generally speaking, when I'm going into an engage, I want to hit off both my buffs, balance stance, wins if I'm the person that's winsing. Otherwise, don't do balance stance and wins if you're not the person that's bubbling. And then break enchantments after that. All Spellbreakers want to do that. And then you go into hammer and you want to get off as much CC as possible. So I'll just be back here. Buffing, let's say we have a gyro down and blasting stealth for our group. We're pushing in. Balance stand wins is up. Hitting this off, swapping to hammer. Hitting this skill off, then I would do full counter, then I would hit burst again potentially, then I might cripple, I might knock people into my bomb, and then I'm going to CC them there. That's pretty much what you're doing, and then you get back into sword as soon as you can for that rebuff, and then if we're pulling off, I might beat back to my tag. So that's what that might look like for you. There isn't really a tried and true way, you just got to figure out what works for you, what works best for your comp, but that's just something to bear in mind. For the power variation of, oh, 1 second, let me just get out of combat here. For the power variant of Spellbreaker, in some ways it's very similar, in other ways it is not so much. You're still focused on boon removal, just like you are on... You're still focused on boon removal in the way that you are on support Spellbreaker, a little bit less boon rip going on, but what you're trading in for that is you still have that wins, you still have that break enchantment, it's just your skills are actually doing damage now, which is great, and you're also, while your sustained damage isn't going to be as good as, say, a Rev or a Guardian or something like that, your burst is really good. You can get off big numbers at at a drop of a hat and can secure downs that way. So that's why people like having power Spellbreakers on occasion in their groups, is so that way they can do as much of that damage as possible. So like most DPS classes, you'll see you can either pretty much run it like Marauders or you can run it Berserker, depending on how comfortable you are having lower HP. I feel very confident playing Power Spellbreaker, so I run it full Zerker and I run it with Strength Runes. You can really run it with any DPS runes. You could run it with, I don't know, Vampirism, Eagle, Scholar, Rage, anything. I run Strength just because I find I generally have at least a stack of Might on me at any given time, so I just like the damage buff that way, but it's all personal preference. You're running that full power DPS set, and then for the kind of traditional meta way, like the highest DPS variant on paper, it's going to be Greatsword and then Sword Axe. You're using Sword again for that movement, and you're using Axe because of the weapon skills. They're pretty handy for you, as well as you're running Greatsword. And Greatsword you pretty much always want to be running on a power Spellbreaker, just because it is, I find it to be very juicy damage. It's good damage, it's a great movement for you as well, it's great positioning, it's just an all-around good tool on warriors. You'll see that tons of warriors will swear by Greatsword. So I run it Force and Hydromancy on Greatsword. You could always look at other options as well, and then I run it Force and Impact. I might run it Force Hydromancy. I might even run it Force Bloodlust sometimes too if I want to get more power stacks. All of those work super well here. That's how I would run it when I'm doing Greatsword and then Sword Axe. Your Sword is for movement again, just like before. However, your Sword 3 can actually hit for a bit of damage. I still don't use it very much. Pretty much you're only swapping to Sword and Axe for the movement and then to do tons of damage with your Axe skills. And then you're swapping back to Greatsword the rest of the time because that's the better one for DPS on your bursts as well as just better positioning. So Other than that, for this trait line, I'll kind of go over the trait line quickly. You're running Spellbreaker, however, you're running the entire top bar, so you still have Loss Aversion, and you still have Enchantment Collapse, but you now have Pure Strike for extra critical hit damage, which is even further buffed against boonless foes, which is great. You're running Disciplined for that increased movement speed and that removal of immobilization on movements, because you're able, on this set, you're able to remove Immobile on Sword 2 whenever you use that to reposition. You also remove it whenever you use Greatsword 3 and Greatsword 5, so I'll go over those in a moment. You also want to be able to swap weapons a bit more frequently in this weapon set, I find. You also are getting Adrenaline whenever you do that, and you're also getting a reduction of those burst skills because you're going to be pumping out a ton of DPS here. And also just being able to get back your Adrenaline is great on the Power Spellbreaker line, while also buffing the damage that your bursts do. I also run it with Destruction of the Empowered to do even more damage if the people have boons. So I'm getting a damage buff here if they do have boons. I'm getting a damage buff here if they don't have boons. Both work well for me. You can also run it with Brawler's Recovery, but this is what I like running. And then you're going to run Strength as your third trait line. There is, for the Axe variant, I would run this with Peak Performance. I would run this with Forceful Greatsword, which is giving you Might whenever you have a chance to get Might when you crit, which for me is great because of my Strength runes, but even without, very handy to have. And you also get that reduction of Greatsword Recharge, which is great as well. And then Berserker's Power, so whenever I'm bursting, I'm doing increased damage for a period after that, which is very strong as well. You can also run Axe Mastery here. I find the Ferocity isn't enough to like really be a big game changer for me, but it does reduce your Whirling Axe skills cooldown by like 3.5 seconds. So instead of it being 18 seconds between casts, it'll be more like 14.5. So it can be useful for sure. However, I generally run Burst Mastery because I like getting Adrenaline back. I like dealing more damage on my bursts on Greatsword. Okay, so other than that, there is also a Hammer variant as well. I personally run Greatsword Hammer. A lot of GvG groups will run Greatsword Hammer, so they kind of get a mix of AoE, CC, cripple, stuff like that, while also getting the Greatsword love. If you do run that line, I would just recommend you, well, you can go Berserker's Power still, or you can go with Merciless Hammer to get increased damage to disabled foes, recharge reduction on Hammer, as well as getting Adrenaline when you're CCing people. So that can be super handy as well. That's what I normally run, but I'll go over kind of the more accepted meta variation for now. So for this, you're running, as I kind of talked about before, you have Defiant Stance as your Get Out of Jail Free card. You're running Break Enchantment still, which is actually doing a little bit of damage now, which is nice, on top of that boon removal. Balance Stance to set up your bubble, just like before. However, you are also, because this is your, this isn't actually your Stun Break, this is more your offensive bubbling tool, you do want to run another Stun Break. I personally recommend having another Stun Break for this, unless you're very confident in your stab, just because you're much more prone to dying on this than you are on support. So I think there's kind of like 3 good stun break options for this. You could also run like Stomp, I guess, as well as a 4th if like you want the damage buff, you want the CC, and you're like playing GVGs or something. But I think for general open world play, I don't run this as much because it's more prone just to blast people out of my bombs. Shake It Off is that AoE stun break again with a little bit of condition removal. Endure Pain is a stun break that is also kind of a bit of a get out of jail free card because you're not taking physical damage during that time, which is great. The one that I run is actually Featherfoot Grace. I feel like this skill is kind of undervalued, underappreciated. Not only is it a stun break, but it also gives you like 5 seconds of resistance and super speed. So you're breaking a stun, and then even if you have a mob or something on you, you're still able to ignore that and get back to your tag or wherever you need to be. So I like running this skill. It all comes down to personal preference again. You could also run something like Signet of Fury if you want extra precision. Like there's a lot of ways you can go about this, depending on how confident you are in your stab and how risky you like to play on Power Spellbreaker. For this weapon set, I wouldn't use Fury as much. I don't find it's as useful here. Really what you're doing is you're using this set as your movement tool, as well as Dual Strike is okay for quickness. You're only getting a second of quickness out of it, but you know, it is what it is. But the big one here is Whirling Axe. This skill does a ton of damage. You just want to be making sure that you're using it either on like people who have been CC'd, like you're going to be able to confidently get the entire burst off on them, or using it on downs as well. It's a great tool for cleaving downs to win rally wars and things like that. So that's how I generally use it on like a first bomb or something like that if I am running this variant. So what generally I'm going to do is I'm going to push in, let's just say I am Bubbler again. Actually, before I do that, I'll just go over Greatsword quickly. So for Greatsword, auto attack's fine. It does a little bit of damage. 100 Blades is great, kind of in a similar manner to Axe 5. However, the enemies really do need to be stationary. So you want to essentially position yourself in a spot where you can cleave 3 targets ideally, and it's people that are not moving ideally. So you can just get off as much of that damage as possible. Greatsword 3 is a decent amount of damage if you can hit all of the impacts. It also is a great movement tool. It removes immobile because of how we're traded, and it's also evade frames. Really great for getting back to your tag or getting behind an enemy bomb, for example. Greatsword 4, it's just a little bit of a range pressure tool. If you're doing a small pull bomb, range spike, something like that, you can kind of contribute a little bit with this. And then Greatsword 5, most of the time, unless I need to like catch up with tag or something, I'm going to be using this as an escape tool generally. So I might get stuck into melee, and then I might be pulling off, and I can use the skill to get back away from the fight, kind of get a little breather, get back to tag, whatever it ends up being. Or I might use this to catch up to the front of the tag if I need to get off that first bubble. So I'm going to go kind of quickly through my weapon rotation if I'm running this variant. I might do something like, okay, we're going to push in 3, 2, 1, big stab now, dropping bubble in 3, 2, 1, getting off this. I'm going to go into my Axe 5 here. And then at this point, I'm going into Greatsword. I'm doing that burst again, full counter, and then going into Greatsword again like that. And then I might hit off 100 blades if people are still there. And then if tag's going off, I might go in the direction of tag. Arcing Slice gives you Fury. It does a lot of damage, and it does even more damage to people under 50% HP. Remember, you are not doing as much sustained damage as a DH or a Herald would on this class, but what you are doing is you are finishing down. So if I see guys like this, these are the people I want to be hitting with my Arcing Slice every single time. People under 50% HP. And ideally, I should be moving the entire time while I'm doing this. So you're chasing after people, you're looking for lows, and you're trying to get them in your cleave whenever possible. And then if they go down, you can finish them off with that Axe 5 skill. Other than that, if you run the Hammer variant instead, I would prioritize CCs a little bit less. Like, you still are doing CCs, especially on bombs and stuff like that, like bubbles, but you do have a slightly different kind of like skill priority on it. Let me just pull out my hammer here. I run it with Force and Absorption. Again, just comes down to personal preference for that. But essentially, you want to be prioritizing skills that do more damage again. So the ones that are going to do a lot of damage on this, and kind of my general sort of setup if I'm running Hammer on a Power Spellbreaker, is I'm going to be getting Earthshaker off to get that damage buff, and to... it's to get that damage buff and to CC people, and then at that point what I'm going to do is I'm immediately going to go into Hammer 2 because this does extra damage to controlled foes. At that point, I'm probably going to hit off Backbreaker, which is Hammer 5. And this is, it's a single target knockdown, but what it also does is it refreshes my Hammer 2 skill. So I can use Hammer 2, Hammer 5, Hammer 2, in the same way that I can do this burst combo. Again, I don't use the burst as frequently when I'm on Hammer. Really what it is I might do something like, let's just see here. So I'm going to push in 3, 2, 1. My wins in 3, 2, 1. I'm hitting this off. I might hit Hammer 3 to get Adrenaline if I still need it. Going into Earthshaker, Hammer 2, Hammer 5. Hammer 2, and I'm going into Greatsword again. I might be getting off 100 Blades, doing my Arcing, going into full counter. As soon as I got Adrenaline again, I might do another Arcing in 3, 2, 1, Arcing. And you're just trying to finish off downs that way. And that's pretty much it, you guys. There isn't anything too crazy going on with Warrior. It does take a lot of practice to get really, really good with it, but it is a very easy class to kind of pick up the basics for sure. I find it's a great learning tool. I would highly recommend support Spellbreaker to any new players trying to learn World vs. World. It kind of gives you a good idea of what's going on. You can learn and not feel like you're getting crazily punished and still contribute to your Zerg in a positive way if you don't feel comfortable enough with some other classes. So I think that's it, you guys. I don't think there's anything else really to go about here. Again, I'll probably pump out, I'll try and get another video out by this upcoming week here. I'll decide which class it'll end up being. I'll probably going to contribute, well, yeah, I'm going to commit to Necro. I'll say that I'll probably do Necro next week. That's probably what it'll end up being unless I decide to do Berserker. But yeah, you guys, that's pretty much it. Again, thank you if you watched my previous video and left some good feedback there. I really appreciate it. If you're new, hopefully you find something useful in this video here. And other than that, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Have a good one.